Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray. I'm going to attempt to answer a question on Dacian warfare today from Negrisan George, or it may be George Negrisan. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not sure if that should be Jorge or however that's said. He asks, read about how Dacians have imposed high tribute from the Romans in the 1st century AD. I'm not an expert, but I think the Dacians were the only tribe who got tribute from the Roman Empire. And then how the Daco-Romans started a war with Trajan and invaded Dacia with a third of the Roman army. And of course, they defeated the Dacians, robbed Dacia. So this is most interesting because, yes, indeed, the Dacians do get tribute. There are probably more tribes that are provided tribute that we don't really get evidence on, but certainly the Dacians are the major one. Later in the Roman Empire, in the 5th century, you certainly have the Huns being paid off in hundreds, not thousands of kilograms of gold to stay away. Now, the interesting thing with that, of course, is that the weight of gold looks impressive and looks to be not an admission of defeat, but certainly not the Roman never saying no to an invasion that we think of. But if you're thinking about it in pragmatic terms, the cost of that gold to prevent the Dacians from raiding or invading, just like with the Huns later, is probably much cheaper than the cost of a military expedition. And so in that regard, it may not actually be defeatist at all. It could actually be quite pragmatic. Having said that, of course, what you get in the wars with the Dacians, and not just Trajan's, which famous because of the column, but other wars against the Dacians. And of course, what we find later in the 2nd century AD is that various tribes of Dacians are still warring against the Romans. In Marcus Aurelius's wars, there's Dacians invading Roman territory and Marcus Aurelius punishing Dacians too. So there's that aspect of it. So firstly, there is this idea, and we do get the idea in Strabo that the Dacian or the Gito-Dacian Empire is as powerful as the Roman Empire in the late 1st century BC. And it's hard to know because the two never come into contact. And by the time they do come into contact, you've got a different set of circumstances and a splintering of the powerful empire at that time into 4 different parts. Now, the other thing, of course, about the Dacian wars, and I'm writing about this at the moment, one of the Dacian wars that gets ignored is the Dacian Wars of Domitian. Now, Domitian fights wars in Dacia from around 85 AD through to about 92. They get abused in the sources, Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny. They all abuse them as a sham. The only person who doesn't seem to abuse them as a sham is Frontinus, who seems to have been on that expedition. Peculiarly, he's not mentioned by Juvenal in the 4th satire, which lampoons all these commanders in the Dacian Wars of Domitian. But all of the commanders that are lampooned in that satire were, in fact, very experienced military men. And this is a big expedition or big expeditions that Domitian organizes. Doesn't really do anything in terms of creating a province of Dacia. And of course, it's after Domitian that you get this tribute paid and Roman advisors going into Dacia, which may have led to strengthening of Dacian fortifications and defenses against invasion. But it's also a problem, of course, because Domitian seems to lose 2 legions. We think possibly 21 Rapax and possibly Primigenia, and possibly 5 Alaudae. But there's other arguments that they were lost earlier, but it's a problem. Now, I think that Domitian's campaign is called a sham because there isn't any visible signs of success that can come back to Rome. And the triumph that Domitian celebrates is accused of having imperial slaves dressed up like Dacians. And I think and it's not my phrase, it's a slow engineering campaign to create a frontier. We have some evidence in some really obscure writings on Roman land surveying about the creation of that frontier. Having said that, Vespasian and Titus seem to be strengthening the Dacian frontier from Carnuntum across. So chances are that this Domitian campaign has been planned for some time. There's nothing propagandistically, which pleases the Romans. And he ends up losing to legions, but he ends up winning battles too, the Battle of Tapai in 86 AD, for instance. And at best, it's a fighting draw. And we get, the name of Decebalus is mentioned, but is he the general of King Duras? We're not sure. Some people think Decebalus is the title rather than the name. It's all a bit confused. What does happen, however, is there's a 10-year hiatus between the end of Domitian's wars and the beginning of Trajan's. And I think that one of the things that's happening in that period is the lessons learned by Domitian or by Domitian's commanders are being taught to Trajan. And my reasoning behind that is that one of the major figures in the ascension to power of Trajan is indeed Frontinus. And one of his commanders in the Dacian War is Frontinus' son-in-law, Senecio. So there's a connection between Trajan and Frontinus. Now, when Trajan invades and, has hard-fought victories, they are similar to the ones that Domitian had. They are very tough engineering victories. There's very little to show for what they're doing. And I think that the idea behind the column is a propaganda coup to show what this campaign is achieving in sculptural relief. Whereas what Domitian had suffered from was, you've got nothing to show for your campaigning. You're not achieving anything. And I think with with Trajan, you've got the same circumstance of there's nothing to show for your victories. Your hard fought engineering campaigns defeating each of these massive Dacian fortresses. Where's the signs of victory? And so Trajan learns that lesson that Domitian didn't, and he builds Trajan's column and says, here's what I'm achieving. Look, in glorious stone. And so I think that that's the case. That idea of building a column showing victory, of course, is repeated in the column of Marcus Aurelius for his Germanic and Sarmatian wars. Again, probably because there's not a lot to show for the victories. They're not gaining wealth. Certainly not visible wealth in that regard. Probably lots of slaves, but not much visible wealth. And so I think there's that lesson. You get similar things. I mean, by the time of the Arch of Septimius Severus in 193, it's an arch rather than a column. But, you still get things like that, columns elsewhere in the empire. So there's that. I think the interesting thing with that is that the idea that they take Dacia for the gold mines isn't really borne out in the source material. It's not telling us that there's a huge influx of gold immediately after the campaign, or indeed that gold was the purpose of the campaign. Both campaigns, Trajan and Domitian, and even going back to Ovid, are that the Dacians cannot help but raid over the Danube and attack Roman provinces and kill governors, massacre population. So in a way, the campaigns of both Domitian and Trajan, and then later Marcus Aurelius, are to punish the Dacians for a raiding across the Danube. And that continues right through until the campaigns in the 5th century AD. So I think that's one of the ideas, not to say they didn't gain the gold, but I don't think it was a reason for them doing it. And of course, it's a really interesting development of Roman imperialism, because of course the gains they make in the creation of the province of Dacia don't last very long. It's a very hard province to hold, and it gets abandoned, the earliest of any Roman province. So hopefully that answers your question. Of course, you can ask us a question too. You can back us on Patreon, patreon.com/Ancient Warfare Podcast, and then back us at one of 3 levels, a legionary, an optio, or a centurion. You can send us a letter, a telegram. You can send us a postcard. You can send us an email, comment on any one else of these videos, and I will try and answer the questions that you ask. So we'll see you again next time. Thanks. Bye.